Every story has a moment that changes everything. And today, we're about to discover it. Step out of the vehicle, now. The voice cut through the morning like a blade, sharp, controlled, leaving no room for hesitation. Ashley froze. Her fingers were still wrapped around the ignition key. Halfway through turning it, the engine hadn't even fully come alive yet, but the world around her already had. Red and blue lights flooded her mirrors, blinking, flashing, demanding. Her heart skipped once, then started racing. Wait, what? She glanced up, eyes catching the reflection of the patrol car behind her. The lights weren't going anywhere. If anything, they felt closer now, louder. A car door slammed, measured footsteps approached. Ashley swallowed, trying to make sense of it, but nothing made sense. Not this early, not like this. She rolled down her window slowly. "Good morning, officer." Step out of the vehicle. Same tone, same weight. No greeting returned. Ashley blinked, confusion settling into her chest. "I'm sorry. Is there a problem?" A brief pause. Then, "This vehicle was reported stolen." Silence, not just around her, inside her. Ashley let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but it didn't carry humor, just disbelief. "What? No, this is my car." By now, movement stirred around the edges of the parking lot. A man slowed his walk. Someone across the street stopped. A phone lifted, watching, recording. Ashley pushed her door open slowly and stepped out, raising her hands just enough to show she wasn't a threat. Then she looked directly at him. Steady, clear. "You think I stole my own car?" And just like that, everything shifted. Not because of the flashing lights, not because of the crowd beginning to gather, but because of what that moment meant. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? I mean truly accused, where no explanation seemed to matter. Have you ever stood there, trying to speak, but already knew the other person had made up their mind? Because that's where Ashley was. Just hours ago, she had been inside a hospital room, standing over a patient whose life was slipping away. Her hands steady, her focus sharp, doing everything she could to keep someone breathing. She didn't hesitate. She didn't question it. She just did her job, saved a life, went home, slept for barely a few hours, and came right back out, ready to do it all again. No recognition, no applause, just responsibility. And now, she stood in a parking lot, being told she stole her own car. No warning, no understanding, just a conclusion already made. Because this wasn't just about a car, and it definitely wasn't just about a routine stop. What you're seeing here is something bigger. It's what happens when a decision is made before a conversation even begins. When authority speaks, but doesn't listen. When a person is reduced to a suspicion, instead of being seen as a human being. Ashley wasn't arguing. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't giving any reason for this to escalate. And yet, the situation had already been defined for her. No questions first, no space to explain. Just an accusation, delivered like a fact. And that's the part most people don't notice. Because moments like this don't always start with anger. They start with assumption. Quiet, immediate, unchecked. Sebastian believed he was doing his job, but in that moment, the line between duty and judgment had already been crossed. And what happens when that line is crossed? Time is lost, trust is broken, and respect? Respect doesn't come back easily, because what happened next didn't just cost time. It cost something far more difficult to repair. So now the question becomes, what happens next? Does Ashley just accept it? Stand there and let the moment pass? Or does this turn into something bigger? Because time isn't on her side. There's a hospital across the city expecting her, patients who don't get to pause their situation because of a misunderstanding. Every minute here costs something. And what about Sebastian? Does he pause long enough to question himself? Or does he push forward, convinced he's right? Because, here's the truth, moments like this don't stay small for long. Not when people are watching, not when cameras are already recording, not when the truth is sitting right there, waiting to be acknowledged. And when that truth finally comes out, It doesn't whisper. It hits hard, because, within minutes, everything Sebastian thought he understood about this situation was about to fall apart in front of everyone. Before we go any further, if you've ever been in a situation where you were judged before you could even explain yourself, go ahead and like this video, not just for the story, but for what it represents, and I want you to be real in the comments. What would you do if you were standing in Ashley's place right now? Would you stay calm, or would you react differently? Because moments like this test more than patience. They reveal character. And if stories like this matter to you, stories that make you think, question, and see things from a different perspective, make sure you subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Welcome to Mr. Obama Stories, where stories don't just get told, they come alive. This is the home of powerful American stories, stories of struggle, success, mystery, history, and the unforgettable moments that shaped people, communities, and dreams. From inspiring life journeys to shocking real events, every story here is crafted to make you think, feel, and see the world differently. At Mr. Obama Stories, we believe every voice matters and every story carries a lesson. Whether it's motivation, history, real-life drama, or untold experiences, you'll always leave with something unforgettable. So sit back, relax, and let the story begin. Because here, every story has a meaning, and every meaning has a story. Subscribe and become part of the journey. Chicago didn't ease into the morning. It moved fast. Train tracks rattled in the distance. Tires rolled over damp streets. Conversations blended into one steady hum as people stepped into the day with purpose or pressure, sometimes both. Ashley stepped out of her apartment building on the south side, pulling her coat tighter against the morning air. The cold didn't bother her much. She barely noticed it anymore. Her mind was already somewhere else. "All right," she whispered under her breath, adjusting her scarf. "Let's go." That was her routine. No long speeches, no hesitation, just a quiet agreement with herself to keep moving. She walked toward the parking lot with steady steps, her bag resting against her shoulder. Inside it, half-packed lunch she'd probably forget to eat again. That had become a pattern, not because she didn't care, because someone else always needed her more. At 28, Ashley had built her life around showing up for people, not loudly, not for recognition, just consistently. Inside the hospital, she wasn't the most talkative nurse. She wasn't the one telling jokes in the hallway or drawing attention during breaks. But when things got serious, when a patient's condition changed without warning, that's when people looked for her. Because Ashley didn't panic. She focused, and that made all the difference. The night before had been no different. A long shift. One emergency after another. Hours that blurred together until time barely meant anything. She had walked out of the hospital when the sky was still dark, her body heavy, her thoughts quiet, went home, slept, woke up, and now she was here again, doing it all over, not because it was easy, because it mattered. As she reached her car, she paused for just a second. Not long, just enough to take a breath. Moments like this were rare, small pockets of stillness, before everything picked up again. She unlocked the door, opened it, sat inside, closed it gently. The outside noise faded just enough. Okay. Her hands rested on the steering wheel for a moment before moving toward the ignition. Simple, routine, expected. Across the city, Sebastian's morning followed a different rhythm. Everything in his apartment was exactly where it should be. Shoes aligned near the door. Countertops clear. No clutter. No distractions. He moved through his routine without pause. Coffee. Black. No sugar. No variation. The television played quietly in the background, but he wasn't really watching it. Just enough sound to fill the space. He adjusted his uniform in the mirror, straightened the collar, checked the fit. Perfect. That mattered to him. Not appearance for the sake of it, but order. Things made sense when they were in place. Rules worked the same way. Clear, defined, reliable. People? Not always. Over the years, Sebastian had learned that what looked normal on the surface didn't always stay that way. He had seen enough situations turn unexpectedly to stop giving the benefit of the doubt too easily. It wasn't something he said out loud. It wasn't something he even fully acknowledged, but it shaped how he moved, how he looked at situations, how quickly he made decisions. He picked up his keys, paused briefly, then headed out. Back on the south side, Ashley adjusted her seat slightly, rolling her shoulders to shake off the last bit of stiffness from the night before. Her reflection caught in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, but steady. She gave herself a small nod. You got this. Not dramatic. Just enough. She reached for the ignition. Sebastian stepped into his patrol car, closing the door with controlled precision. His hands rested on the steering wheel for a brief second. Then, he started the engine. 2 different mornings, 2 different mindsets, moving forward on the same city streets, neither one aware that within minutes, their paths were about to collide. Ashley turned the key. The engine came to life with a low, familiar hum. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again, predictable. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel as she exhaled, letting that small sense of control settle in. Outside, the city kept moving, but inside the car, there was a pocket of calm she hadn't felt since the night before. She adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, checked the time. I'm good, she murmured. Not early, but not late either. She shifted her foot toward the brake, preparing to pull out. Then, flashing lights. Red, blue, sharp bursts of color filled the mirror, cutting straight through the calm she had just found. Ashley froze. What? The lights didn't pass. They stayed, right behind her. Her grip tightened slightly on the wheel, as her eyes locked onto the reflection. For a split second, she thought maybe it wasn't for her. Maybe the officer was responding to something else. But the car behind her didn't move, and neither did the lights. A second later, a door slammed. The sound echoed through the lot, clear and final. Ashley's heartbeat picked up, steady but faster now, as she turned her head slightly, trying to get a better look without making any sudden movements. The officer stepped out. Sebastian. His posture was straight, controlled, every movement deliberate as he closed the distance between them. No rush, no hesitation. Just focus. Ashley swallowed, then rolled down her window slowly, her voice calm even as confusion settled in. Good morning, officer. Step out of the vehicle. No greeting, no explanation, just instruction. Ashley blinked, her brows pulling together slightly. I'm sorry. Is there something wrong? Sebastian's expression didn't change. His eyes moved briefly across the car, then back to her. This vehicle was reported stolen. The words landed without warning. Ashley let out a short breath, almost a reflex. What? No, this is my car. Her tone wasn't offensive, just direct, certain. Sebastian didn't respond immediately. He took another step closer, his attention fixed, as if he was measuring more than just her words. Step out of the vehicle. Same tone, same weight. Ashley hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Not because she intended to resist, but because none of this lined up. She had done nothing unusual, nothing wrong, and yet, here she was. She pushed the door open slowly and stepped out, keeping her movements controlled. Her hands lifted slightly, not exaggerated, just enough to make it clear she wasn't a threat. Okay, I'm out, she said, steady. The morning air felt different now, heavier. What had been a quiet start to the day was now something else entirely. Ashley glanced briefly around the parking lot. Movement had started, subtle at first. A man walking past had slowed down, his attention shifting toward them. Someone near the building entrance paused, watching a little longer than necessary. Not a crowd, not yet, but attention was building. Ashley turned her focus back to Sebastian. Officer, I don't understand. This is my car. Sebastian's gaze shifted briefly to the vehicle again, then back to her. Do you have proof of ownership? Ashley nodded immediately. Yes, of course. It's in the glove compartment. She moved slightly toward the car. Stop. The word came firm. Immediate. Ashley paused mid-step. I'll retrieve it, Sebastian added. Ashley raised her hands a little higher, stepping back just enough to give him space. All right. No argument. No resistance, just Cooperation. Sebastian moved to the passenger side, opening the door with controlled precision. His attention remained sharp as he reached for the glove compartment and pulled it open. Ashley watched him, not with fear, not with anger, just confusion that hadn't settled into anything else yet. Because this still didn't make sense. Sebastian pulled out the registration, his eyes scanning it quickly, then again, slower this time. The name matched, the details aligned, everything was there, and yet, something in his expression didn't fully shift, not yet. He closed the glove compartment and stepped back, holding the document. Step over here. Ashley exhaled softly, crossing her arms, not defensively, just grounding herself as she moved closer. Officer, I have work in less than 20 minutes. Her tone remained calm, but there was weight behind it now. Not urgency for herself, for what she was responsible for. Sebastian glanced at her briefly. You should have thought about that before taking someone else's car. That line landed differently. Ashley didn't respond immediately. Her expression changed, not sharply, not dramatically, but enough to show something had shifted. Not anger, not fear, just disappointment. She looked at him, steady. You really think I stole my own car? The question didn't rise. It didn't challenge. It sat there, clear, unavoidable. Behind them, the small gathering of attention grew just a little more. Another person slowed down. A phone lifted. The situation was no longer just between two people. It was being witnessed, and the stakes were starting to rise. The question lingered in the air. You really think I stole my own car? Sebastian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked back down at the registration in his hand, scanning it again as if the details might suddenly change. Same name, same vehicle, everything aligned. But certainty doesn't always disappear the moment evidence shows up. Sometimes it resists. Quietly, stubbornly, he stepped slightly to the side, his hand moving toward his radio. Dispatch, run plate and registration. Confirm ownership. His voice was steady, controlled, routine. Ashley stood where she was, watching him, her arms still crossed loosely. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush him. She simply waited. That calmness stood out. Most people would have raised their voice by now, demanded answers, pushed back harder. But Ashley didn't, not because she didn't feel the weight of the situation, but because she understood something else. Escalation wouldn't fix it. Not here, not like this. The seconds stretched, then more. The space between them felt longer than it was, filled with something neither of them spoke out loud. Behind them, the quiet attention from earlier had grown into something more noticeable. Two people near the entrance stood closer together now, speaking in low tones while still watching. The man who had slowed earlier had stopped completely, his dog now sitting beside him as he looked on. Another phone lifted, then another. Ashley noticed. She didn't turn toward them fully, but she was aware. This wasn't private anymore. Sebastian noticed too. His jaw tightened slightly, but his focus stayed forward. Control, that was what he held onto. Even now, Ashley glanced at her watch. Time moved forward, whether situations made sense or not. I'm going to be late, she said quietly. Not a complaint, just a fact. Then she looked back at him. And I don't think you understand what that costs people. Her voice didn't rise, but the meaning carried. It wasn't just about her schedule. It was about what she was responsible for. Lives didn't pause. Needs didn't wait. And every minute here mattered somewhere else. Sebastian didn't respond right away. His grip on the radio shifted slightly as he waited for dispatch to come back. For the first time, his attention moved differently, not scanning, not searching for a mistake, but observing. He looked at her again, really looked this time. The uniform, slight creases from long hours, the faint exhaustion in her posture, not weakness, but wear from carrying responsibility over time. Her composure, no panic, no attempt to manipulate the situation, just presence. Something about it didn't align with the version of events he had already formed in his mind. The radio crackled. Plate confirmed. Vehicle registered to Ashley. No reports of theft. Repeat, no reports of theft. Silence followed. Not immediate reaction. Just stillness. The kind that forces everything to settle at once. Sebastian lowered the radio slowly. The information was clear. There was no ambiguity, no missing detail, no reason to question it further. He turned toward Ashley. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Ashley met his eyes, not with satisfaction, not with victory, just truth. Uncomplicated. So, one word. Nothing extra, but it held everything. Behind them, the shift was instant. Voices, low at first, started to rise just enough to be heard. That's what I thought. Man, come on. The man with the dog shook his head slightly. Officer, unless she borrowed it from herself in another universe, I think you might have missed on this one. A few quiet laughs followed, not loud, but enough to break the tension just slightly. Ashley's lips pressed together for a second, a faint hint of humor touching her expression. But it didn't last, because the moment wasn't over, not yet. Sebastian stepped forward, holding out the registration. There seems to have been a mistake. The words were measured, careful, but they didn't carry what the situation required. Ashley didn't reach for the document immediately. She looked at it, then back at him. A mistake. She repeated it slowly, as if testing the weight of it. Then she shook her head, just slightly. You know what's interesting? She stepped a little closer, not aggressively, just enough to make sure her words didn't get lost in everything around them. If I reacted the way you expected me to, this would have gone very differently. That landed, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Sebastian didn't interrupt, didn't defend. For the first time, he didn't control the moment. Ashley finally took the registration from his hand. But she didn't step away. Not yet. You didn't just stop me, she said. A pause. Clear. Direct. You judged me. Another pause. And people don't even realize how often that happens. No anger. No raised voice. Just clarity. The kind that doesn't fade quickly. Around them, phones remained up. The moment was being captured. Shared. Stored. Ashley glanced at her watch again. Time hadn't slowed. I really have to go. She turned slightly toward her car, then paused, looking back at him one last time. Not with resentment, not with hostility, just something honest. I hope you learn from this. Then she opened the door, got in, closed it. The engine started, and seconds later, she drove away, leaving behind silence that felt heavier than everything that came before. Sebastian remained where he stood, the space around him clearing slowly as people began to move again. But the moment didn't move with them. It stayed, and for the first time, he felt it, not as an officer, but as a man who had just been forced to see something he couldn't ignore. Sebastian didn't move right away. Ashley's car had already turned out of the parking lot, disappearing into the flow of traffic beyond the corner. But the moment didn't leave with her. It stayed, right there. Heavy, unfinished. He stood still for a second longer than necessary, the registration no longer in his hand, but the weight of what just happened still sitting firmly in his chest. Then, he reached for his radio again. Dispatch, he said, voice steady but tighter than before. Confirm last report on that vehicle. There was no hesitation in his tone, but something underneath it had changed. Subtle, almost unnoticeable. Still, different. The response didn't come immediately, and that space, that silence, stretched. Around him, the parking lot wasn't returning to normal as quickly as it should have. People hadn't fully left, not yet. The man with the dog remained nearby, though he had taken a few slow steps back. His attention hadn't shifted away. Two others stood closer now than before, speaking in low tones but not quietly enough to disappear completely. That didn't look right. He didn't even listen to her. A phone angled slightly higher. Another person adjusted their position to get a clearer view. This wasn't passive anymore. It had turned into observation with intention. Sebastian noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed. But this time, he didn't address it, didn't redirect it, didn't shut it down. Because for the first time since stepping out of his patrol car, his focus wasn't fully outward. It had started to shift inward. Ashley's words echoed back, not loudly, but clearly enough to stay present. "You judged me." He exhaled slowly. That wasn't how he had seen it. Not at first. To him, it had been procedure, suspicion, verification, steps that made sense in sequence. But now, standing in the aftermath, those same steps didn't feel as solid. There was a gap, somewhere between what he thought he was doing and what had actually happened. "Dispatch to unit. Stand by." The radio crackled. Sebastian adjusted his grip slightly, his posture still firm, but his thoughts no longer aligned as cleanly as before. Across the city, Ashley drove with both hands steady on the wheel. Traffic lights came and went. Cars passed. The city kept moving like nothing had happened. But inside the car, everything felt sharper. Her jaw tightened briefly before she released it, focusing her attention back on the road. She checked the time again. Late, not critically late, but closer than she wanted. Her mind ran through the shift ahead. Patience, rounds, everything waiting for her, and underneath all of that, a quiet frustration, not loud, not overwhelming, but present, because nothing about what just happened had been necessary. Back in the parking lot, Sebastian shifted his stance slightly. His eyes moved across the space again. The people, the subtle distance between them and him. That distance hadn't been there before. Not like this. Before, his presence created authority. Now, it created separation. He should have just checked first. That's messed up. The voices weren't directed at him, but they didn't need to be. They were close enough, clear enough, and for the first time in a long while, Sebastian didn't dismiss them, didn't filter them out. They stayed. His radio crackled again. "Stand by for confirmation." His grip tightened just slightly. Control, that's what he had relied on. Always. Situations made sense when handled correctly. But this one was no longer sitting in that same space. Ashley slowed at a red light, her fingers tapping once against the steering wheel before settling again. She took a breath. In, out, focus. That's what mattered now. She couldn't carry the moment with her into the hospital. She didn't have that option. People depended on her being present, clear, ready. Still, the words replayed. This vehicle was reported stolen. She shook her head slightly, not in disbelief anymore, just acknowledging it had happened, and moving forward anyway. Back in the lot, Sebastian's posture shifted again, almost imperceptibly, less rigid, less certain. His eyes dropped briefly to the ground before lifting again. The situation had ended, but the feeling hadn't, and now, he was waiting, not just for confirmation, but for something else, something he hadn't needed to look for before. The radio crackled once more, a faint sound, but this time, it held weight. Sebastian lifted it slightly, listening. The moment stretched, right up to the edge of clarity. The radio cracked fully this time. Clear, direct. Plate confirmed. Vehicle registered to Ashley. No reports of theft. Repeat, no reports of theft. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed once, and that was enough. Sebastian didn't respond immediately. His hand remained on the radio, but his grip loosened slightly, as if the tension holding it had just given way. For a brief moment, everything stilled. Not the city, not the background noise, but the moment itself. The space around him felt suspended, like something had just shifted into place and couldn't be undone. A voice broke the silence first. "There it is." Another followed. "I knew it." The crowd didn't grow louder all at once. It built, layer by layer, low voices becoming clearer, observations turning into reactions. Phones angled higher now, not just recording, but capturing something people already understood. This wasn't unfolding anymore. It had already unfolded. Sebastian lowered the radio slowly. The confirmation had removed any space for interpretation. There was no second version of events, no missing detail to recover, just the truth. Clear, final. He turned, not quickly, not sharply, just enough to face the direction Ashley had driven, though she was no longer there. The moment she left behind still was. So what now? The question came from somewhere in the crowd. Not aggressive, but not quiet either. It didn't demand, it exposed. Sebastian exhaled through his nose, a controlled breath that didn't settle what had already begun to shift inside him. His posture straightened again, almost out of habit, but it didn't carry the same weight as before, because control, the kind he relied on, was no longer fully in his hands. You stopped her for nothing. Didn't even listen. That's not right. The voices weren't unified, but they didn't need to be. They pointed in the same direction, and this time, Sebastian didn't push against them, didn't correct, didn't assert, because there was nothing to correct. He stepped forward slightly, as if movement alone could re-establish something familiar, but it didn't. The space still felt different. The moment replayed in his head, her standing there, her voice steady, her words, "You really think I stole my own car?" At the time, he had dismissed the tone, focused on the possibility. Now, the tone was the only thing that made sense. A man near the edge of the lot shook his head slowly. "That's crazy." Another voice followed. "Man, that's how stuff escalates for no reason." No one was shouting, no one needed to. The weight of what had happened didn't require volume. Sebastian's jaw tightened slightly, not out of anger, out of realization, because the structure he operated within, procedure, order, certainty, had failed to account for something simple. He hadn't paused, not even once. He looked down briefly, then back up. The people hadn't moved far. They were still watching, still present, and now, they weren't just witnesses, they were part of the moment. Ashley's absence became more noticeable the longer he stood there, because she should have still been here, explaining, clearing things up, but she wasn't. She had already done that, and left. "So that's it?" The same voice from earlier spoke again. "You just let her go like that?" No response followed, not from Sebastian, because what answer could he give? That it was a mistake? That he was following instinct? That he had reason? None of it held the same weight anymore. He shifted again, his hands settling at his sides. The uniform still fit the same. The badge still sat where it always had, but the presence behind it had changed. Another voice cut through. "You should apologize." That one landed differently. Direct, simple, and accurate. Sebastian's eyes moved toward the direction Ashley had gone once more, but she wasn't coming back. There was no immediate correction, no second chance in that moment, and that was the part that settled in the deepest. The moment had passed, and with it, the opportunity to handle it differently. The crowd didn't press forward, didn't escalate further, but they didn't disappear either. They remained long enough to make sure the silence wasn't mistaken for resolution. Sebastian took a slow breath, in, out, but it didn't reset anything. Because this wasn't about regaining composure anymore. This was about understanding what had just happened. He looked at his hands briefly, steady, still, but not as certain as before. Behind him, one of the voices spoke again, quieter this time. "People don't forget moments like that." No one responded, but no one disagreed either. Sebastian lifted his head slightly, his gaze forward, but not fixed, not rigid. For the first time since stepping into the situation, he didn't feel like the one directing it. And somewhere in that shift, something settled in. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough to stay, because authority without reflection doesn't hold for long. And now, he was standing in what was left of it, with no way to undo what had already been done. The parking lot didn't return to normal, not immediately. Even as a few people began to move, there was still a lingering presence, an awareness that something important had just taken place. Not loud, not chaotic, but significant enough to stay with anyone who witnessed it. Sebastian stood in the middle of it, no longer reacting, no longer directing, just standing. Ashley's voice replayed in his mind again. Clear, steady. "You didn't just stop me. You judged me." At the time, it had sounded like a statement. Now, it felt like something deeper, something that didn't belong only to that moment. Sebastian shifted slightly, his eyes scanning the space again. The people who remained weren't speaking as much now, but they were still present, still watching, still processing. She handled that better than most people would. Yeah, real calm. That could have gone way worse. The voices carried a different tone now, less reactive, more reflective. And that's when it settled in. The situation hadn't escalated. Not because it couldn't have, but because Ashley didn't allow it to. Sebastian exhaled slowly. That realization didn't sit lightly, because it meant something simple. The outcome hadn't been controlled by him. His role in the situation had been clear: authority, decision-making, control. But none of those had prevented what actually happened. Ashley had. He looked toward the exit of the parking lot again. Still empty, still distant. The words continued to sit with him. You judged me. Not loud, not aggressive, just accurate. For years, Sebastian had trusted his ability to read situations quickly, to assess, to act, and most of the time, that worked. It kept things moving, kept things structured, but this time, that same approach had led him somewhere else, somewhere he hadn't intended to go. And now, he had to face that. A phone lowered nearby. Someone shook their head slightly before turning away. Another person spoke quietly. That's going everywhere. No one questioned it. The moment had already moved beyond the parking lot. Sebastian became aware of that without needing confirmation, because moments like this didn't stay contained, not anymore. He adjusted his stance again, but this time it wasn't about control, it was about grounding. The uniform still carried meaning. The badge still represented something, but now, those things felt heavier, not because they had changed, but because his understanding of them had. Ashley's final words returned. I hope you learn from this. At the time, they had sounded simple. Now, they felt like expectation, not from her alone, but from the moment itself. Sebastian looked around one last time. The space was clearing now, people moving on, returning to their routines. But the situation didn't leave with them. It stayed, because it wasn't just an interaction anymore. It was a reflection. He took a slow breath, then another, not to reset, but to accept what had already taken place. Across the city, Ashley moved through the hospital doors with purpose. No hesitation, no pause. The environment shifted instantly. Voices, movement, urgency. A patient needed attention. Another call came from down the hall, and just like that, she was back where she was needed. There was no time to sit with what had happened, no space to process it fully, because someone else required her focus. But even as she moved, the moment stayed with her, not as anger, not as distraction, but as something familiar. She adjusted her gloves, stepping into the next room without breaking pace. All right, let's take a look, she said calmly, her voice steady, present, focused, because no matter what happened outside, inside these walls, people depended on her to show up the same way. Every time. Back in the parking lot, Sebastian finally turned toward his patrol car, his steps slower than before, measured. He reached for the door, paused, then opened it. As he sat inside, the silence hit differently. No radio chatter, no movement, just space. And in that space, the moment replayed again, not the accusation, not the stop, but the realization, you judged me. This time, he didn't push it away. He let it stay, because now, he understood something he hadn't allowed himself to see before, that moments like this don't end when the situation is over. They carry forward, and whether someone chooses to face them or ignore them determines what comes next. Sebastian sat there for a second longer, then started the engine, but this time, he didn't feel the same certainty driving away, only the beginning of something else, something he hadn't expected. Something he couldn't ignore. The station didn't sound different. Phones rang. Conversations moved across desks. Footsteps echoed through the hallways like they always did. Everything functioned the same. But the feeling was not. Sebastian noticed it the moment he stepped inside. Not immediately. Not in a way that announced itself, but in the way people looked. Or didn't. He walked past the front desk, his steps steady, his posture still aligned with habit. Nothing about his movement suggested hesitation, but the air around him had shifted, subtle, controlled, yet impossible to ignore. A conversation stopped as he passed, not abruptly, just cut short. The two officers standing nearby didn't turn toward him. They didn't need to. The silence that followed said enough. Sebastian kept walking, didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge it, because on the surface, nothing had been said, but beneath that, something had. He reached his desk, set his keys down. The sound was sharper than usual, or maybe everything just felt sharper now. A file sat where he left it, unmoved, waiting, routine. He pulled out his chair, sat down. His hands rested briefly on the desk before moving toward the paperwork. Normal, structured, familiar, but even as he began to read, his focus didn't settle the way it usually did, because across the room, someone glanced in his direction, then looked away, too quickly. Another officer passed behind him, paused for just a fraction of a second, then kept moving. No words, no confrontation, just awareness. Sebastian's jaw tightened slightly, not visibly, but enough for him to feel it. The station wasn't reacting loudly. It didn't need to. This was something else, a shift. He exhaled slowly, turning a page in front of him. The words blurred for a second, before coming back into focus. Then, a voice called out, "Sebastian." He looked up. The tone wasn't casual. His supervisor stood near the office doorway, watching. No urgency, no raised voice, but clear. "Come see me." Sebastian pushed his chair back, stood. The walk across the station wasn't long, but it felt measured in a different way. Not because of distance, because of attention. He could feel it now, more directly, eyes lifting, tracking. No one spoke, but they were aware. Sebastian reached the office door, paused briefly, then stepped inside. The door closed behind him. The space inside was quieter, more contained. His supervisor remained standing. Didn't sit. That alone shifted the tone. Sebastian stood across from him, straight, composed, waiting. A moment passed, then another. His supervisor studied him for a second before speaking. "We received a complaint." The words were direct, no build-up. Sebastian didn't react outwardly. "We're reviewing it." A pause, and there's video. That landed differently, not because it was unexpected, but because it confirmed something he already understood. This hadn't stayed where it happened. It had moved, beyond the parking lot, beyond the moment. Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something inside him shifted again, because now, this wasn't just about what happened, it was about what came next. The office door remained closed. Outside, the station continued its routine. Inside, the atmosphere had changed completely. Sebastian stood where he was, facing his supervisor. No movement, no attempt to speak first, because the direction of this moment was no longer his to control. His supervisor walked around the desk, slowly, not rushing, not dragging the moment either. Measured, deliberate. He stopped on the other side, rested both hands lightly against the surface. "Walk me through it," he said. The tone wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't open-ended either. Sebastian took a breath, kept his posture straight. Vehicle was flagged. He began. I approached. Requested compliance. Retrieved registration. Initiated verification. His voice was steady, structured, professional, no emotion added. His supervisor listened without interruption, but his expression didn't shift. Not once. And before verification came back, his supervisor asked. A brief pause. Sebastian didn't rush to fill it. I proceeded based on initial assessment. That answer stayed in the room. It didn't resolve anything. It exposed something. His supervisor nodded slightly. Not in agreement, in acknowledgement. Then, "You told her the vehicle was stolen." Not a question, a statement. Sebastian held eye contact. "Yes." Another pause. And it wasn't. No. The space between those two words carried everything. His supervisor stepped away from the desk, walking a short distance, before turning back. You understand what that looks like? Sebastian didn't respond immediately, because this time, the question wasn't about procedure, it was about perception. Yes, sir. His supervisor studied him for a moment longer, then spoke again. We're not just looking at the stop. A slight pause. We're looking at how you handled it. That distinction mattered, because it meant the issue wasn't isolated to a single decision. It was the entire sequence. Sebastian remained still, listening. We have the footage, his supervisor continued. Multiple angles. Another pause. And it doesn't support your judgment. That landed without resistance. There was nothing to push back against, because Sebastian had already seen it. From the outside, through the reaction of the people who watched, through the absence of anything that justified escalation. His supervisor stepped closer now, not aggressively, but directly. You didn't pause, he said. Simple. Clear. Accurate. Sebastian's jaw tightened slightly. Not in defense, in recognition, and that matters, his supervisor added. Another pause. Then, you put yourself, and the department, in a position that shouldn't have happened. The words weren't raised, but they carried weight, because they weren't about blame alone. They were about consequence. Sebastian took a slow breath, held it, then released it. Still steady, still composed, but something underneath had shifted further. His supervisor returned to the desk, opened a folder, didn't rush, didn't soften. When he spoke again, it was final. Turn in your badge. No build-up, no hesitation, just decision. The room didn't react, but Sebastian did, not outwardly, not visibly, but internally. Something dropped. The words didn't surprise him, but hearing them made it real. He reached toward his chest. His fingers paused for just a fraction of a second before closing around the badge. It had weight, familiar, constant, a symbol he had worn every day without questioning what it meant. Until now, he unclipped it, slowly, held it in his hand, looked at it briefly, not with pride, not with regret, just awareness, then placed it on the desk. The sound it made, soft, but final. His supervisor didn't reach for it immediately. He let it sit there, between them, visible. This is pending investigation, he said. Sebastian nodded once. No argument, no attempt to negotiate, because this wasn't a moment that allowed for it. This was outcome. Clear, unavoidable. The space in the room felt different now. Less about authority, more about removal. Sebastian straightened slightly, but it didn't carry the same presence as before, because something essential was no longer there. His supervisor closed the folder. That'll be all. No dismissal tone, no extension, just closure. Sebastian turned toward the door, his steps measured, controlled, but not anchored in the same way. He reached for the handle, paused, not long, then opened the door. The station was still active outside. Phones, voices, movement, nothing had stopped. But, as he stepped out, the difference was immediate. The looks came quicker now, more direct, no longer uncertain, because something had changed, and everyone could feel it. Sebastian walked forward, not rushing, not slowing, just moving, past desks, past conversations, until he reached the exit. The door opened, then closed behind him, and just like that, he was outside. No badge, no immediate authority, just himself, standing in a space that felt unfamiliar, not because it was new, but because his place in it had changed. The hospital didn't slow down for anyone. Doors opened and closed in steady rhythm. Monitors beeped in controlled patterns. Voices moved through hallways with purpose. Quick, focused, necessary. Ashley stepped through it all without hesitation. Her pace matched the environment. Efficient, direct, locked in. Vitals just came in, someone said as she passed. Ashley nodded once, already shifting her direction before the sentence finished. Room 3? Yeah. She pushed the door open. Inside, the air felt tighter. A patient lay still, breathing uneven but present. Ashley moved closer, her hands already adjusting gloves. "All right," she said, voice steady, grounded. "Let's take a look." Everything outside that room, everything from earlier, stayed where it belonged. Outside, inside, there was only one focus. She checked the monitor, adjusted the line, observed, calculated, responded. No wasted motion, the same precision she carried every day. Because here, there wasn't room for distraction. Minutes passed, then more. The situation stabilized. Not perfect, but controlled. Ashley stepped back slightly, her eyes scanning once more to confirm. "Keep monitoring," she said. "Calm, clear, I'll check back." She stepped out into the hallway. The noise returned instantly. Movement, voices. She pulled off her gloves, dropping them into the bin before leaning briefly against the wall. Not long, just enough. A breath, in, then out. Her shoulders relaxed for a second, then reset, because the next moment was already waiting. But this time, something lingered, not from the room, from earlier. It didn't interrupt her, but it didn't disappear either. Her eyes dropped briefly, then lifted again. She pushed off the wall and kept moving, because that's what she did. She kept moving. Across the city, Sebastian stood outside the station. The door behind him had already closed, but he hadn't moved yet. Cars passed on the street. People walked by without noticing him. Life continued, but his position in it felt different, not physically. Internally, his hands rested at his sides. Empty. That absence stood out more than anything else. No badge, no weight on his chest, nothing to reach for, nothing to represent the role he had carried for years. He exhaled slowly. The air felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the environment, because of the shift. He stepped forward finally, not toward anything specific, just away from where he had been. His pace wasn't rushed, but it lacked direction. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't moving with purpose. And that felt unfamiliar. His mind replayed the moment, not the accusation, not the confrontation, but the outcome. The badge leaving his hand, the words that followed, pending investigation. That phrase stayed with him, not as a question, as reality. He stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, watched a car pass, then another. Everything moved the same, but he didn't feel aligned with it, because something had been removed, and nothing had replaced it yet. Back at the hospital, Ashley stepped into another room, another patient, another situation, different details, same responsibility. She listened, adjusted, responded. Her movements remained consistent, reliable, because people depended on that, and she didn't allow anything to disrupt it. Not even what had happened earlier. But in a brief moment, as she stepped away, her hand rested lightly against the counter, just for a second longer than necessary. Her eyes lowered. "Why is it always like this?" she murmured quietly, not directed at anyone, not expecting an answer, just acknowledging something she had felt before. Then, she straightened and moved again, because she had to. Across the city, Sebastian continued walking. No destination, no urgency, just movement. His reflection passed briefly across a storefront window. He caught it, stopped, looked, same face, same posture. But something didn't match, not externally, internally. He held that gaze for a moment, then looked away, because whatever he saw, he hadn't fully processed yet, and maybe he wasn't ready to. The city moved around both of them, one carrying forward, through responsibility, the other standing at the beginning of consequence. Same streets, different weight, and for the first time, both of them felt it, in their own way, alone. Sebastian's apartment felt different that evening, not because anything had changed. Everything was exactly where it always had been. The couch aligned with the wall, the table clear, the kitchen untouched, but the space no longer carried the same structure it once did. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The sound echoed slightly more than usual, or maybe he was just hearing things differently now. His keys landed on the table, a familiar motion, automatic, but there was no follow-up, No next step in the routine. Because the routine had been broken earlier, he walked further into the apartment, his movements slower, less defined. The television remote sat where he left it that morning. He picked it up, turned the screen on. Images filled the room, voices followed, but his attention didn't hold. He lowered the volume, then muted it completely. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It carried something. He set the remote down and leaned back slightly, his eyes fixed forward but not focused on anything specific. His phone rested on the table beside him. The screen lit up briefly. Then again, notifications. He didn't reach for it immediately. He already understood what it meant. The moment from earlier hadn't stayed contained. It had spread, not through official channels, through people, through perspective, through recording. He picked up the phone after a few seconds, unlocked it. Messages, mentions, clips. He opened one. The video was short, just enough to capture the interaction. His voice, clear, firm. Step out of the vehicle. Then, this vehicle was reported stolen. Ashley's response, calm. The angle wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The moment spoke for itself. He stopped the video before it finished, locked the phone, set it back down. He didn't need to watch the rest, because he already knew how it ended. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. His hands came together. For a while, he didn't move, not out of habit, out of thought. But this time, the thought didn't circle. It moved, step by step. What did he see first? A car, a person inside. What did he assume? That something was wrong. What did he do next? He acted, without pause, without question. That sequence had always made sense to him, until now, because now, he could see the gap, the space where something should have happened, but didn't. A question, a moment to listen, a chance to verify before deciding. He exhaled slowly. His gaze dropped toward the floor, then lifted again. The pattern wasn't new. That was the part that stayed with him. This wasn't the first time he had relied on instinct like that. It was just the first time. It had been seen clearly, by others, and now, by him. He leaned back again, his shoulders resting against the couch. The room felt quieter, not because of the lack of sound, because of the absence of distraction. There was nothing pulling his attention away from the moment anymore. No structure to fall back into, no role to step into, just himself. And the reality of what had happened. He looked toward the wall briefly, then away. His jaw tightened slightly, not in frustration, in recognition, because the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He hadn't misread the situation. He had skipped part of it. And that difference changed everything. Ashley's voice came back again, not loud, not forceful. You judged me. At the time, he had heard it, but he hadn't accepted it. Now, he did, fully. He sat there for a while longer, not avoiding the thought, not pushing it away, letting it settle, because, for the first time, he wasn't trying to justify it. He was trying to understand it, and that required something different. Honesty, real, uncomfortable, necessary. His hands loosened slightly, the tension in them easing just enough. Then, quietly, he spoke, not to anyone else, just to himself. I didn't even give her a chance. The words stayed in the room, and this time, he didn't look away from them. A few days passed, not enough to erase what happened, but enough to change how it settled. The city moved the same way it always did. Traffic filled the streets. People followed routines. Moments came and went. But for Sebastian, things didn't feel as structured. His days had lost their usual rhythm. No early call-ins, no patrol schedule, no uniform waiting by the door, just time, and more space than he was used to. That morning, he stepped out of his apartment without urgency. No destination that required precision, no clock pressing him forward, just movement. He walked down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, his pace steady but unplanned. The city passed around him, familiar, yet distant. He turned a corner without thinking much about it. And that's when he saw it. A small coffee shop, nothing special from the outside, but open. He paused briefly, then stepped inside. Warm air replaced the cool outside breeze. The smell of fresh coffee settled into the space. Low music played in the background. A few people sat scattered around, some working, some talking quietly. Normal. Sebastian moved toward the line. His eyes scanned the menu without fully reading it. Just something to focus on. Something simple. Ahead of him. Someone shifted slightly. He didn't pay attention at first, until she turned. Ashley. The recognition was immediate. Not gradual. Not uncertain. Clear. She noticed him at the same moment. Their eyes met, and everything else in the room faded just enough to make space for that moment. Neither of them spoke. Not right away. There was no confusion about who the other person was. No need for introduction. Just silence. But not the same kind as before. This one carried awareness. Ashley held his gaze for a second longer, then turned slightly back toward the counter. Not dismissive, not welcoming. Just neutral, measured. Sebastian remained where he was. The option was clear. He could step back, leave, pretend the timing wasn't right. That would have been easier, cleaner. But something held him there. Not hesitation, something else, a decision forming. Ashley stepped forward as her order was called. She moved to the side, waiting. Sebastian watched for a second, then stepped forward as well, not rushing, not forcing it. Just enough to close the distance. Ashley. Her name left his mouth steady, not loud, but clear. She turned back toward him. Her expression didn't shift much. Still calm, still controlled. "Hi," she said. Simple, direct, no extra tone attached. Sebastian nodded once. A brief pause followed. Not awkward, but filled with everything that had happened between them. He didn't look away, didn't avoid it. Because this time, he wasn't going to step past the moment. He started, then stopped briefly, not because he didn't know what to say, because he wanted to say it correctly. He exhaled once, then continued, "I owe you a real apology." The words landed without hesitation, no defense, no explanation attached to them. Just acknowledgement. Ashley didn't respond immediately. She studied him for a moment. Not searching for something dramatic, just evaluating whether the words carried weight, whether they meant something. Her coffee was called. She reached for it, then stepped slightly to the side, giving space, not leaving, not ending the moment, just shifting it. Sebastian followed, keeping a respectful distance. Neither of them rushed the next part, because this wasn't something that needed speed. It needed clarity. Ashley looked at him again. Still calm, still grounded. "Okay," she said, one word, but open, not forgiving, not dismissing, just allowing the conversation to exist. And that was more than he had expected. Because now, there was only one direction this moment could go. Forward. Ashley wrapped her fingers lightly around the cup, the warmth settling into her hands as she leaned slightly against the counter. Sebastian stood a short distance away. Not too close, not distant either, just enough space to keep things clear. For a moment, neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because this wasn't the kind of conversation that should be rushed. Sebastian took a breath, then another. This time, when he spoke, there was no hesitation. "What I did that morning was wrong." The words came out steady, not heavy, not dramatic, just honest. Ashley's eyes remained on him. He continued, "I didn't take the time to understand what was actually happening. I made a decision too quickly, and I treated you like you had already done something wrong." A brief pause. "That wasn't fair to you." No excuses, no attempt to soften it, just clarity. Ashley didn't respond immediately. Her gaze didn't shift. She wasn't reacting to the apology. She was measuring it, looking for something beneath the words. Something that showed whether he understood what he was saying or just knew what to say. Sebastian didn't fill the silence. He let it stay. Because this wasn't about convincing her. It was about being clear. Ashley finally spoke. "You're right." Her voice stayed even. "You didn't take the time." A small pause. And that's the part that matters. She shifted slightly, adjusting her grip on the cup. Because situations like that, they don't just happen out of nowhere. She looked at him directly. They come from how someone sees things before anything even starts. Sebastian listened, not interrupting, not preparing a response, just taking it in. Ashley continued, I wasn't upset because you asked questions. Another pause. I was upset because you didn't ask any. That landed clearly. No room for confusion. Sebastian nodded once. That distinction stayed with him, because it wasn't about the stop itself. It was about how it was handled. Ashley exhaled softly, her shoulders easing just slightly. Where I come from, she said. That kind of moment isn't unusual. Her tone didn't change. Still grounded, still controlled. But that doesn't make it okay. Sebastian's expression shifted subtly, not defensive, not resistant, just aware. I understand that now, he said, and this time, it wasn't automatic. It carried weight. Ashley studied him again. The difference was there, not in what he said, but in how he held it. A brief silence followed. Then, she let out a small breath. You know what made it worse? She added. Sebastian waited. You didn't even realize it. That line stayed between them, because it pointed to something deeper, not just action, but awareness. Sebastian didn't look away. I realize it now, he said. No emphasis, no attempt to prove it, just truth. Ashley nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. That was enough for the moment. A small shift passed between them, subtle, but real. The tension that had been sitting there, tight, unmoving, began to ease, not disappear, just loosen. Ashley took a sip of her coffee, then glanced at him again. You really thought I stole my own car, though? The question came with the faintest trace of humor, not mocking, just honest. Sebastian exhaled lightly. A small shake of his head followed. Yeah, he admitted, that's not something I'm proud of. The corner of Ashley's mouth lifted slightly, just for a second, then it settled again. Because while the moment could lighten, it wasn't something to forget, but it didn't need to stay heavy either. They stood there quietly for a moment longer, not uncomfortable, just present. Ashley adjusted her grip on the cup again, then shifted her weight slightly. So what happens now? She asked. The question wasn't directed at him alone. It carried more than just the situation between them. Sebastian understood that. He took a breath. I'm figuring that out, he said. Honest, uncertain, but grounded. Ashley nodded once. That answer made sense, because not everything had a clear resolution. Some things required time, change, consistency. She glanced toward the door briefly, then back at him. Well, she said, at least you're starting in the right place. A small pause followed, not final, not closed, but complete enough for what it was. Respect, not full trust, not connection, but the beginning of something different, and sometimes that was enough. The days that followed didn't reset anything. They moved forward, quietly, steadily. Sebastian didn't return to the station, not yet. The investigation was still in place, unresolved, but he didn't spend his time waiting for it to end, because something had shifted, and staying still didn't feel right anymore. That morning, he stood outside a small community center on the south side. The building wasn't large, but it was active. People moved in and out. Voices carried through the open doorway. Sebastian paused for a moment before stepping in, not out of hesitation, out of awareness. This wasn't his usual environment. Inside, the space was simple. Chairs arranged in small groups, a few tables set up, nothing formal, but purposeful. A man near the front looked up briefly, then nodded toward an open area. Sebastian returned the nod. No introduction needed. He moved further inside. At first, he didn't speak. He listened. Conversations around him carried different tones, not rushed, not guarded, just real. People spoke about work, life, frustrations, things that didn't make it into reports. Sebastian took a seat near the edge of the room, not in the center, not removed either, just present. For once, he wasn't there to assess. He was there to understand. and that required something different. Patience. A woman across the room spoke about a situation that had been misread, not loudly, but clearly enough to carry. Sebastian didn't interrupt, didn't form a response. He just listened, because this time, that mattered more. The hours passed without urgency, no structure, no command, just time spent in observation, and slowly, something began to settle. Not resolution, perspective. Outside, the city continued moving. Inside, he adjusted, not dramatically, but consistently. Across town, Ashley moved through her own routine. Hospital corridors, patient rounds, nothing about her pace changed. Still focused, still reliable, but something had shifted slightly. Not in her actions, in her awareness. She had seen Sebastian again. He had spoken, and what he said had stayed with her, not because it erased anything, but because it acknowledged it. And that mattered. Later that afternoon, as she stepped out of the hospital, her phone buzzed briefly. A message, simple, from Sebastian. Coffee sometime? No pressure. Ashley looked at the screen for a second, then locked it, not ignoring it, just thinking, because moments like that weren't simple. They carried context, history, and choice. The next day, Sebastian returned to the community center. This time, he didn't stand at the edge. He took a seat closer, not leading, still listening, but more present. Someone asked a question across the group. General, open, what would you do differently? Sebastian didn't speak right away, but this time, he didn't stay silent either. I'd listen first, he said. The words came out steady, not performative, just honest. A few people nodded, no reaction beyond that. And that was enough, because it wasn't about approval, it was about change. Later that evening, Ashley sat at her kitchen table. Her phone rested nearby, the message still there, unread again. She picked it up, read it once more, then typed, "Short coffee." Nothing more. She paused, then sent it. The following afternoon, they met again. Same coffee shop, different moment. No tension like before. No silence that carried weight. Just presence. Real. They sat across from each other. No rush to speak. No pressure to fill space. Just normal. And that was new. Sebastian leaned back slightly. "Thanks for coming," he said. Ashley nodded once. "Yeah," she replied. A brief pause. Then, just coffee. A small boundary. Clear. Respected. Sebastian nodded. Just coffee. And for the first time, the moment didn't feel heavy. It felt possible. Not complete. Not resolved. But moving. Forward. Slowly. And sometimes, that's how change begins. The first coffee didn't turn into anything more, and that was intentional. They talked, but not about everything. Surface level at first. Work, schedules, simple things that didn't carry weight. Ashley kept it that way. Clear, structured. Sebastian followed that lead, not pushing, not trying to move the conversation further than it needed to go, because this wasn't about rushing anything. It was about showing consistency, and that couldn't be forced. Days passed. Then another message. Walk, public place, your choice. Ashley read it. This time, she didn't take as long to respond. Short walk. Simple, defined. They met near a park. Open space. People around, movement in every direction. Nothing private, nothing closed off. Just neutral ground. Ashley arrived first. She stood near the entrance, hands resting lightly at her sides, her posture relaxed, but aware. Sebastian approached a few minutes later. No rush in his steps, no hesitation either. Just steady. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Ashley replied. No tension, just acknowledgement. They started walking, side by side, not too close, not distant, comfortable enough. For a while, they didn't speak, not because it was awkward, because it wasn't necessary. The sound of footsteps on the pavement filled the space between them. People passed, voices drifted, life continued around them. Eventually, Ashley spoke. You've been going to that community center again? She didn't look at him when she asked, just kept her eyes forward. Sebastian nodded. Yeah. A small pause. Still figuring things out. Ashley nodded slightly. Good. That was it. No praise, no extra words. But the tone. Acknowledged effort. They walked a little further. Then Sebastian spoke. I didn't realize how much I missed before, he said. Ashley glanced at him briefly, then back ahead. What do you mean? Sebastian took a breath. Listening, he replied. Not rushed, not rehearsed. Actually hearing what people are saying, instead of deciding what it means right away. Ashley didn't respond immediately. She let the words settle. Then, that takes time, she said. It does, Sebastian agreed. Another pause. Then Ashley added, and consistency. Sebastian nodded. I know, and this time, he didn't say anything else, because there wasn't anything to add. They reached a bench. Ashley slowed slightly, then sat. Sebastian sat beside her, still that same distance, respecting space. The moment felt different now, not guarded, not open either. Somewhere in between, Ashley leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. You know what people get wrong? She said. Sebastian turned slightly toward her. What? They think understanding something once means they've changed. She looked at him now, direct. But it doesn't. A brief pause. It's what you do after that matters. Sebastian held her gaze. No disagreement. Because he understood that, more clearly now than before. I'm not expecting anything from you, Ashley continued. Her tone stayed calm. But I am paying attention. That line carried weight, not pressure. Clarity. Sebastian nodded once. That's fair. And it was. Because trust wasn't something that came back quickly. It had to be built, step by step, moment by moment. A light breeze passed through the park. Leaves shifted slightly. The sound filled the space for a second. Ashley leaned back slightly now, her posture relaxing just a bit more. You're different from that day, she said, not as a compliment, as an observation. Sebastian didn't respond right away, because he wasn't trying to prove it. I'm working on it, he said. Simple. Ashley nodded. That answer mattered more than anything else he could have said, because it didn't claim anything. It acknowledged the process. They sat there for a while longer, not forcing conversation, not avoiding it either, just allowing the moment to exist. And slowly, something shifted again, not dramatically, not suddenly, but enough to feel the distance between them, not physical, but emotional, began to close, not completely, but noticeably. Ashley glanced at him one more time, then looked ahead again. You know, she said. A small pause. This is better than I expected. Sebastian exhaled lightly. Yeah, he replied. It is. And that was the first moment. That didn't feel like correction, or consequence, or recovery. It felt like something else, something real, still forming, still uncertain, but honest. And sometimes, that's how trust begins, quietly, without announcement, just showing up, again and again. The city looked different at night, not quieter, just slower. Lights stretched across the water, reflecting in steady ripples along the Chicago River. Cars passed in the distance, their movement softened by the rhythm of the evening. Ashley stood near the railing, her hands resting lightly against the cool metal. She wasn't waiting long. Sebastian approached from behind, his step steady, measured, familiar now. Hey, he said. Ashley turned slightly. Hey, no tension, no hesitation, just presence. They stood side by side, both looking out over the water. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them didn't need to be filled immediately, because everything that had brought them here had already been said. Just not all at once. Ashley leaned forward slightly, her eyes following the movement of the water below. It's different at night, she said. Sebastian nodded. Yeah. A small pause. Feels less rushed. Ashley glanced at him briefly. Or maybe people just stop paying attention. Sebastian considered that then nodded again. Maybe. Another pause settled in, comfortable, earned. Not the kind they had at the beginning, something deeper, built over time. Ashley exhaled softly, her shoulders easing. You know. When that happened, she said, her voice steady, I didn't expect to see you again. Sebastian didn't interrupt. He let her continue. Not because I thought you wouldn't care, she added. A small pause. But because most people don't come back to moments like that. Sebastian looked down briefly, then back out at the water. I almost didn't, he admitted. Honest. No hesitation. Ashley nodded slightly. That would have been easier. It would have, he agreed. Another pause, but it wouldn't have been right. That stayed between them, because it wasn't about fixing anything. It was about facing it. Ashley straightened slightly, turning just enough to face him more directly. And now? She asked, not challenging, just clear. Sebastian took a breath. I'm still figuring things out, he said. The same honesty, consistent, but I know I don't want to go back to how I was before. Ashley watched him for a second, not searching, just observing, because this time, his words matched his actions, and that mattered. She nodded once. That's a start. They both looked back out at the river. The lights shifted slightly as the water moved. Steady, unforced. Sebastian leaned his forearms lightly against the railing. You changed how I see things, he said. Ashley raised an eyebrow slightly. I didn't do that, she replied. A small pause. You just finally paid attention. The words settled. Simple, but complete. Sebastian let out a quiet breath. Because he understood that now. It wasn't about her changing him. It was about him choosing to see what had always been there. They stood there for a while longer. No rush to leave. No need to fill the silence. Because the moment didn't require anything more. It had already done what it needed to do. Ashley stepped back from the railing slightly. All right, she said. A soft shift in tone, not ending anything, just moving forward. Sebastian nodded. Yeah. They turned, walking side by side along the river path. Not as strangers, not as something defined, but as two people who had reached a point of understanding, and sometimes that was enough. Because not every connection needs a label. Some just need honesty, consistency, and time. As they walked, the city continued around them, unchanged, but their perspective within it was different. Ashley glanced ahead, then back slightly. You know what I've learned? She said. Sebastian looked at her. What? That moments like that. She paused briefly. They don't define everything. Another step forward, but they do reveal something. Sebastian listened. What someone does after. That's what matters. He nodded slowly, because now he understood that more than ever, not just as an idea, as experience. They continued walking, the distance ahead open, uncertain, but not unclear, because both of them knew something now that they hadn't before, that people are more than a single moment, but the way they respond to that moment, that's what stays. Ashley slowed slightly, her voice softer now. Everyone's carrying something you don't see, she said. Sebastian looked ahead, then nodded. I know. And this time, he meant it fully. They walked a little further, before stopping at the edge of the path. No dramatic ending, no final statement that tried to close everything perfectly. Just a moment, complete in its own way, because some stories don't end with everything resolved. They end with understanding, and sometimes, that's more powerful. Ashley gave a small nod. I'll see you around. Sebastian returned it. Yeah, no promises, no expectations, just possibility. And as they went their separate ways, the city carried on. But something had changed. Not loudly, not visibly, but in a way that mattered, because sometimes the person you misunderstand the most becomes the reason you learn the most. And that lesson? That stays.